Welcome to the Courage Never Quits podcast, where members of the class of 1986 tell their stories. I'm your host, Paul LaFontaine. My guest today is James Crawford, column number 43067. We'll hear about Jim's adventures from the artillery ranges of Hawaii to the science laboratories at NASA. As always, the views expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and not of West Point, the Army, or any other government organization, most particularly the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Jim Crawford, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, P-Off.
James Crawford, of course, is your name. What do you prefer we call you? Crawdad, Crawdaddy, or Crawdiddly? Which is your preferred means of address?
You settled in on Crawdad, which I find acceptable. That sounds good.
Okay, yeah. Crawdad, that's good.
We'll go with that.
So, as a man of science, I would love your thoughts on why is it that we were so rudimentary at giving out nicknames. If you like, my name is Paul LaFontaine, shortened to Pilaf. Crawdad, if you take the, Crawdad comes from Crawford. I mean, what is it about us? Didn't we have any imagination at all? I mean,
There's a little bit of laziness in that, I have to say. I spent a month in Thailand last February, and they all have nicknames, but their nicknames have absolutely nothing to do with their actual names. So they actually take on extra names. So yeah, I'd kind of like to have a third name, but I don't have one.
We should form a committee and go back and re-nickname everyone just to make up for it, because I feel like we really missed an opportunity with that. Very few of us have had really original nicknames.
That's true, and I would say compared to Thailand, we're much less laid back than they are. So that they've taken the time to come up with an extra name is really a compliment to them, I think.
Your column number 43067, artificial intelligence. Numerologist, and it says that that number represents stability, practicality, and structure. So the Academy conferred. How do you react to that?
I had lost that name, but it is true that I have been a fairly even-keeled guy over the years. Not a lot of ups and downs, just staying faithful.
Let's talk about your setup now. You really are a scientist for NASA, which is absolutely amazing. Talk about your setup, where you're at, what's going on with the Crawdad family.
So I'm here in Southern Virginia. I'm in the Hampton, Newport News area. NASA has a number of installations around the country, and I'm at NASA Langley, which is actually where the space program first got started before Lyndon Johnson decided he would ship it all out to Texas, right? So this is where the initial astronaut training happened. The work that I do is airborne science, and so I'm not an engineer. I am a scientist, and there are actually fewer of us at NASA than you think. We're kind of, on the fringe. But my work is on the atmosphere, atmospheric chemistry, atmospheric composition. And I've had the joy of spending the last 30 or so years flying in aircraft around the world, taking samples of the air.
So I just have a picture of how you live. Do you live like in a silo with telemetry on the walls and like air quality all over the world? Or do you live in a house like the rest of us?
I live in a house just like everybody else in a little town next door to Langley. So when I moved from Atlanta up here and learned that I could have a 5-minute drive to work instead of that long commute, I signed up for that. So I didn't try to find a nice place down the road. I pretty much moved in next door.
So here's a Jim Crawford story of recent times, and this indicates that we certainly knew you were to become a scientist. So I was going through my old West Point stuff, and my mom very graciously has kept all of that. And I had one paper that fell out, and it was a paper on some sort of strange mathematical transformation. At the bottom, I had written to my professor, "Sir, I must acknowledge that I received the answer to how to do this transformation from Cadet Jim Crawford." So literally the only surviving piece of academic knowledge I have, I basically say that you did the work.
That's pretty funny. I guess I went to our 10-year reunion the first time, and I ran into Darren Moore and Dave Urban, and they joked that they had decided I'd become a rocket scientist, and I had to confess that's exactly what had happened. And then another person. Well, anyway, let's just say that I had a good time helping people when I was. You
were an amazingly smart guy then. Yeah. I'm glad that it's not Dave Urban or Darren Moore currently running the air science program at NASA, because they have their routes in life. I actually just saw Darren, and we were talking about the Academy and catching up, and he said it used to make him so mad that you would be in bed by like 7 o'clock, sleeping like a baby, and he was there with all stacks of homework. So a little bit of resentment. We got to pick a bone with you a little bit, Crawdad.
You could say that, but all I remember is just I was so tired all the time. I was just beat. I slept my ass off at West Point. And I was going to mention, it was second semester yearling year that Michelle Collins ambushed me and said, we had all the same classes, but we didn't have them all at the same time. But she
Right.
decided that we were going to work together for that entire semester. It was my best semester at West Point because she wouldn't let me go to bed. She made me do the work. And so we spent a lot of time hashing it
Michelle
out
Collins,
together.
now Davis. I just visited with her in Augusta.
Yeah.
She and
Yeah.
her husband, Laney. And so for the kids at home, Crawdad, myself, Bob Bullard, who you've already met by podcast,
Yeah. Bob.
Michelle, Darren Moore, and others were all in the same company, which meant we were on the same floor together and shared a lot of our adventures together. So we were three polar bears.
Underbears.
There you go.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
So talk about your children, your family. What? Tell me a little about that.
Yeah. So actually, my wife, Tracy, and I had our 35th anniversary on Thursday, July 4th. We have three sons: Denver, which is the namesake of where you just moved from,
Yep.
Davis and Dell, all grown young men now. Denver and his partner Trey live in New York City, where he works in various ways with the entertainment industry.
Okay.
My youngest Dell, also a theater kid, just graduated this past fall from Texas State in San Marcos. So he's also starting to get into the entertainment business. And then Davis, the son, most like myself, is a computer engineer for Capital One. He's the one that graduated during COVID, but's never been to work ever, but doing
Right.
very, very well. He moved out to Salt Lake City and, climbs in the summer and skis in the winter and does his work on the computer. So they're all doing very well. And Tracy and I are empty nesters, and now she gets to travel with me a little bit on my job, which works out very, very well for us.
So take us back to the days of the young Crawford kids, right? The two oldest are showing signs of interest in entertainment and I imagine media and things like that. And you're coming in with a pocket protector and an HP calculator. What was it like watching your two eldest kind of move down a more creative path?
I was not a convincing father, clearly. Nobody took the path, right? So it wasn't very compelling to them. But if you remember, I was in the cadet band back in the day. I love music and things like that. So instead of being the dad that was, coaching Little League, I was the dad in the pit while my kids were on the stage, doing the show. So that was the way I participated with them. I would volunteer to play the music. And so they would take me on. And so I spent a lot of time doing shows with the kids.
That's great.
And they enjoyed it and loved it. And as much as I told them it was an avocation, not a vocation, that fell on deaf ears. And so now
they knocked the A off the front and off they went.
They're interesting children. I always talk to them about how, they just kind of live their lives, which is wonderful to watch. But that means that they have very, very high highs, but very, very low lows, because what's out there is not in their head. It's what's in the moment. And me, tomorrow is always kind of sitting there. So I've been more like this, and I've watched them go through life, so you're envious of them and you're sorry for them. And then you're envious of them and you're sorry for them. So it's just a different approach to life, really.
And completely valid. Is Tracy creative, or did she help them on this journey?
She is very creative. She was the stage mom. She was the one who figured out the logistics of everything and got them through the door on many different things, and so she was a great mom in that regard. But as much as I tried to keep her home with the kids, she became the city councilwoman here locally and was doing a lot of work online. And so you can't keep a good woman down. She was busy with the kids and busy with many, many other things while I was, doing my stuff at NASA over the past few decades.
Going around the world and making sure that our air is breathable.
Yes.
That's great. So she's a city council. Well, maybe we get you off here and get her on her. She sounds pretty interesting.
She's a politician. She knows how to get things done.
That's excellent.
I need that in my life, as you know.
Well, let's go all the way back to 1978, 1981. You were from Dalton, Georgia. Do I remember that correctly?
Georgia, yeah.
Okay. So we'll go all the way back to 78, 81. West Point, how did it come into your view? Tell us the story.
I was wanting out of Dalton. Dalton was not a place to land, if you will. It was a great place to grow up. Don't get me wrong. I loved Dalton growing up. It was not a place to live unless you want to work in the mill or do something, service-oriented. And, we all start getting those letters from colleges and different things. And the West Point one came in the mail, and, I looked at it and I was going to throw it away. And Mom and Dad were like, wait, you know what that is, don't you? And I'm like, no, I really don't. And they explained it to me. And, I don't have a long history of military service in my family, but I do have, fathers and other people who had served, just 3 or 4 years. And it was an experience I didn't think that would be available to me since I knew I wanted to go to college. But now I understood I could go to college and have a military experience and have it paid for and, blah, 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 on and on. And it was very appealing to me. And so I made the application. It was actually the only college I applied to.
Right. Same for
Oh,
me. The only
yeah,
actual application I submitted was to West Point.
that was I wanted to do. And, I could just go to junior college if I didn't get in. So what was the risk? And I've lived much of my life that way. I usually don't hedge my bets. I figure out what it is I want to do, and then I do it until it either fails or succeeds.
Right, right. And then once you got in, how prepared were you for our day? Did you go through and really prep it up, or did you just kind of wing it?
I was a mess. I came into the academy totally unprepared physically. I was not a high school athlete or any of those things. Somehow I managed to avoid the comms track team, but I was not the measure of fitness. Cadet boxing and all those other things were just miserable for me. Swimming, I was a rock swimmer. Gymnastics was the only thing I was decent at. I did pretty well in gymnastics, but everything else was just murder
Of
on
all
me.
things, right? Yeah. So how
Academically,
was
I was ready.
so cadet boxing was a mandatory class we all had to take that was
Yeah,
because many of us hadn't had a lot of pugilism in our lives, so it was something where we could it was really to test your grit, I guess.
yeah,
Talk about
yeah.
cadet boxing a little bit.
And I have never broken a bone in this body. And that's
Hmm.
that's because I haven't abused. I've been very careful, I guess, not taking a lot of risks. But in retrospect, I am convinced that my nose was broken in boxing. And the
Hmm.
only thing I can say I'm proud of after losing 4 bouts is that I never went down. I always took the punches and I always stood there. But I was pretty bad at the whole thing.
Well, you passed the class, right?
I did pass
So
the class.
the
Yes.
purpose of the class was to get back in the ring on that fourth one, right? And
Yeah.
at the end of the
And it
day,
gave
that
me
was
real respect. You don't realize, but when you do a couple of rounds with all that tension and all that, you're literally spent after 2 rounds of boxing, and to realize just how taxing it was. I wouldn't trade doing it. I hated doing it, but there are a lot of things you don't do in life that in retrospect were very good for you.
absolutely, absolutely. And which cadet company were you in as a plebe?
I was in B1 as a plebe.
B1. So the first regiment was that a Hayes? Was that a Hayes company
It
where they
was,
were
it was a
yellow?
pretty tough. It was a pretty tough company at the
Yeah.
time. But yeah, that was where I
But
was.
you had all the cadet knowledge down. I have to imagine you just because you well. Let's take a step back. Do you have like a photographic memory?
No,
How did you
no,
learn
no,
to
no, no,
study
no,
like
no,
you
no.
do? Because you're pretty
Absolutely
amazing at
not.
remembering things, right?
No, just some things come easy to me.
Okay.
Faces come easy to me. I can recognize people from years ago. It freaks Tracy out a little bit when I do that sometimes.
Right.
But I can remember a lot of things. I guess if I was to say the thing that helped me the most in B1, and this happened at the very beginning of the academic year, we're at the lunch table and they're trying to figure out who we are and they're all giving us hell about different things. And one of the cadets one of the first, he decided he wanted to hear a joke. And the three of us at the end of the table had to tell a joke. And in retrospect, I told a pretty good joke. I know a lot of jokes. And he said, all right, that's your job every day is to tell me another joke, which again takes something that you succeeded at and just kind of makes you wilt a little bit. It's like, oh shit, I got to come up with a joke now every day for the next. I don't remember if it was 6 weeks or 8 weeks that we rotated tables. And so for 6 weeks, I gutted it out and told a joke every day. Not always the best joke in the world, but entertaining enough, right? And we finally rotated tables. I was like, thank God this is over.
Right.
And then we go to the new table and they say, all right, Crawford, do you know why you're here? Like, shit. And as the year went on, it never ended. And there became these bidding, they had bidding wars for me. I want Crawford on
That
my
is
table. He's going to tell the joke.
fantastic.
And it got
That
to
is
the point
fantastic.
where the tables next to us would lean their chairs back to hear what the joke of the day was. And
Really,
so,
all you wanted to do was to get out of that first session, and it became an entire year.
but cooperate and graduate. My classmates came to my aid. They were always handing me jokes, and I got through it. And it was you want to catch good attention, right, when you're a plebe, and that was a way for me to catch good attention. And there wasn't much else that I was going to be known for. So that's a nice memory for me that I was able to entertain my upperclassmen in my company.
That is a brilliant story, and I've never heard that before. So
Well, you
that's
weren't in
fair.
D1, so you didn't have to listen to all those terrible jokes.
Well, no, I imagine.
Jokes that cannot be told on YouTube anymore, right? For
Well,
propriety.
that's why I didn't go down the road of what were the jokes, because I think back in 1982, the topics and the subject might have been a
The air
little
was blue. I'll just say that.
less. Good stuff. So coming to I3 Polar Bears,
Yeah.
I have to admit here in front of our vast audience that the I3 Polar Bears was considered a laid back company. What was that like? That transition coming from a very
That's
hardcore
great.
company to laid back.
My very first roommates were Darren Moore and Rob Dowse, the two California
Okay.
boys.
Yeah. Oh
And,
boy.
and they were a good counterpart to my kind of uptight personality and trying to get everything done just right. So yeah, they helped me out a good bit.
Those are great first roommates. Yeah.
Yeah,
The two
they
of them.
broke me in, so to speak, to the laid back I3 attitude.
That's fantastic. And you became kind of an academic source for the rest of us. Anytime there's a group and there's that one guy you go
Yeah.
to for help with homework, you were the guy.
Well, you want to be helpful, right? You try to find that thing that you can be helpful about. And that was the one skill I had, right?
And master of all subjects. But what was it that you ended up studying as a first year?
Well, remember, we didn't have majors per se back in the day. It was concentrations. I think we could choose one toward the end. I did not. I stuck with a concentration in math.
Really?
Yeah. At the time,
Really smart.
I didn't know what I was going to do at the time, but I knew that math was the language of science. And so it would serve me well just to stick with math and worry about the rest later.
And did that allow you to take a broad range of courses? Did you have more flexibility toward the end? I imagine you did, right?
So you asked the question why I'm doing what I'm doing now. Back in the day, you ordered the catalog. So when I was getting out of the Army, I ordered the catalog from Georgia Tech. Again, one school. I was going to go back to Georgia. Georgia Tech's a great school. So I told my, new wife, let's just go back to Georgia. I'll go to school in Georgia. And flipping through that catalog, atmospheric chemistry came up as a subject that was very, very new. It was in its infancy, actually, believe it or not. And they were looking for people who had strong backgrounds in physics, math, and chemistry. And so instead of having to be really good at anything, they just wanted people who knew a smattering of many things. And so that round education that they keep pushing us towards at West Point was tailor-made for jumping into this sort of burgeoning field of trying to understand the atmosphere, which had only really been cracked. Understanding pollution chemistry in the lower atmosphere kind of blossomed in the early 1970s. So I was jumping into something that was still quite new.
Good for you. That's really a very wise choice at an early age in terms of how you approached your studies.
Sure.
Now, upper class, what was one of your more vibrant or vivid memories of being an upperclassman? Because plebe year is one thing, and then upper class is completely different. When you look
the
back,
other thing, I didn't think much about this beforehand, but now that you mention it, the day room pool table was a big draw for me. I love to play pool. And I was pretty good at pool, too. I could usually win. But your first podcast you did was with Bobby Bullard. And we were playing pool, and it was the upcoming – I can't remember if it was I don't think it was Labor Day weekend. It might have been Columbus Day. I can't remember, but it was in the fall, and it was a 3-day weekend. And Bob wanted to go see Sherry down in St. Pete. And we decided we were going to go over that weekend. There was a Navy soccer game that I was going to play in down at Navy. And so we'd be partly way there. And the question was going to be who had to drive. And so we played 3 rounds of pool, and I lost. And we drove my car to St. Pete and back over a 3-day weekend.
Get out of town. That's such a great thing,
I didn't
right?
do crazy things a lot, but that was a crazy thing. And to get back on time, we spent probably, 3/4 of that time driving and 1/4 of it hanging out down there at his house in St. Pete.
Right. It was a very short visit, but what an epic trip, though, if you think about
Right.
And,
going to
and you think
Carlisle,
about the state of automobile technology.
Tommy Hohenstein was another guy. We go to Carlisle. That was easy, right? You do that quick on the weekend. But going to St. Pete was a little nuts.
Well, remember the state of automobile technology, very different. Like now the car kind of, stays within the lanes. There's all sorts of assists with the cameras and all that. The state of automobile technology was far more primitive back then. So like a thunder run to St. Pete, it's kind of tiring.
We did okay on the way down, but there was a lot of, sleeping in the back and jumping in the front and sleeping in the back.
So when did you join the band and what was your instrument?
I joined the band immediately. And so it was like, I think it was towards the end of Beast, they started talking about it, but just, at the beginning of school, they, had us come and audition, and I knew it was a way to get out. So I was going to the away games and I was getting off post at a time when it's very hard for a plebe to find any breathing room. And so band was a great way for me to do that as a clarinet player. And Russ Spears, people may know Russ Spears as well from West Point. He came from Dalton with me. Karen Phelps, Russ Spears, and myself were the first three people from Dalton, I think, ever to go to West Point. And we all just decided we wanted to go for it, and we went. And Russ was not a musician, but he had played the bass drum in the band in high school. So I called him and said, "You need to come." And he's like, "I don't really play anything." And I'm like, "Just bang on the drum. They'll need you." And so he came, and he joined the band with me. And I can't remember his name now, but there was another drummer, Tom. What's his last name? Anyway, I was at a reunion with him and he asked about Russ, and I gave him this story about Russ joining the band with me, not really knowing how to play anything. And he laughed because he said, "I always wondered why he was so bad at playing the drums." And so, now I get it.
If you recall, there was a lot of strategies for how to get off post because, today the cadets are much more. There's much more funding for interesting things, which I think is a fantastic thing. But back then, you really couldn't get off post when you were more junior unless you were part of one of these groups. And so that was a clever strategy. And I think Russ has the best strategy of all. We'll have to have him on the podcast and ask about his drum skills. Whether he
act like you know how to play the drum, right? Just fake it. Just walk the motions, right?
He certainly is a good actor, right? So he could act like a drummer.
He could beat a bass drum. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to say that he was not capable, but he was not a percussionist. Let's just say that.
Right. There you go. There you go. You went in, so you chose the artillery branch. How did that come about? At what point did you say, "Hey, even though I'm a scientist by nature, I'm going to shoot things"? Shoot cannon?
Well,
What's my?
But the mathematics of artillery is very attractive.
Fair enough.
But, I did tell myself, I didn't think about this until, during yearling year, Buckner summer and all that stuff. I was not thinking at all about what was happening and what I wanted to do. But I did decide that, if I was going to have Uncle Sam take care of me for 4 years, I needed to do a combat arm. Combat arm number one. I had to choose one. Mm-hmm. And, guy like me, I'm not made for the infantry. I know that. I looked at armor, not so interesting. Air defense artillery, you got this really high dollar, shiny piece of equipment that you got to keep nice, but you never shoot it. Artillery is just pound, 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 rounds all the time, right? Live fire, live fire, live fire. It also had a lot of diversity to it. So, I was never doing a job for very long. I was a survey officer. I was on the hill doing, forward observing, FDC, calculating the data, on the gun line, running the motor pool. It was a great way to serve and just a lot of fun, I would say.
That's actually a really great point. If you think about the late 80s, pre-Desert Storm, where the budget was, artillery was one of the branches where you're out actually, shooting stuff.
Doing the real stuff. So, just very, very exciting to do.
I actually, as an MI officer, was making sure that my laser pointer worked. So I was far less lethal, but still I had my own equipment to maintain.
That was the beginning for laser pointers, so they were not as reliable back then as they are now.
Well, you know what? We really had to keep an eye on the darn thing. So graduation, artillery, the math background, great opportunity with the band. What was your first assignment and how did that go about? Because your class rank, I have to imagine, was quite high. So you could pick wherever you wanted to go.
Yeah. I remember Gordy Scott coming up to me and saying, "Where are you going to go? Where are you going to pick?" Because he was calculating whether he could make it to Schofield or not. And he did. He made it there with me. We had a lot of good times out there together. I didn't hang out with Gordy much at West Point at all. As a matter of fact, the first time I met him was when he came up to ask me, "What are you going to pick?" And then when we got there, we ended up really matching up quite well. He was a great friend.
As we gracefully age, what is a little bit lost in our stories with our families and friends is the amount of like competition amongst ourselves. We were cooperating, but we were also competing, because if you had chosen Schofield and someone else, he wouldn't have gotten Schofield, because they really did
That's right.
rank order us. And so there
And
was
you
always this
literally sat in a
underlying,
room. Right. You
yeah,
sat in an auditorium and they would mark them off on a butcher
right.
sheet one at a time. And you would hear the wail from the audience when somebody's, dream assignment went aside. So it was, it was both sad and entertaining at the same time, I guess.
Well,
Right.
entertaining for a gentleman such as yourself, whose grades might have been such that you were there cackling with laughter as the rest of us were struggling.
But
So yeah.
I wasn't gunning for that though. You just do your best so that when the time comes in your life to make a decision, you're calling the shots, right? That's how you want it to be, even though you don't know what's coming.
So you chose Hawaii. Was that just literally because the islands and the exotic nature of it? Was it the unit? What was it that attracted you to Hawaii?
I wanted to surf. I'd never surfed, and I really wanted to try it. And yeah, who doesn't want to go to paradise?
Right.
And so yeah.
And there's not currently, or there wasn't at the time, an infantry division stationed in Los Angeles. Hawaii was the next best thing.
That's right. So off I went.
And how'd you find it over there?
One of the best choices I ever made.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, it was just a great place to be. I spent the first 6 months in the BOQ, and it was the only 6 months in my life that I have lived alone, just with myself. And it was the loneliest 6 months I've ever spent. I cannot live alone. So found some friends, moved to the North Shore, and didn't look back.
Right. One of the benefits of having graduated from the academy, other than the Cullum number and the power that it brings you, is we almost had like a second college, because you have all the West Pointers that are there serving as lieutenants, and so you almost have a second bite at friendships and things. So did you room with a bunch of West Pointers, or how did that work?
I actually didn't. I roomed with Ron Elrod, and actually Bob Mayfield roomed with us. He was from West Point. And then he moved out, and a guy, Brett Wiggins, who was also from West Point, came in. But they were a year behind me. And so I did not end up living with people from my class. I hung out with people from my class.
Yeah.
Some, Gordy probably being the primary one. But no, I made a lot of other good buddies who were just in the service with me, right? So probably the best friend I made in the military was Joe Forth, who was in my unit. And to this day, one of the guys that I keep up with. I'm not the best at keeping up with people. You're very good at that, Paul. I have to say.
There is a podcast to maintain.
Yeah. And I would say that it's not that I don't cherish all those relationships I had, but I'm kind of an in-the-moment guy. So when I see somebody from 20 years ago, it's like, oh, my God, it's so good to see you. I don't want to hear, why haven't you talked to me? I just want to be in the moment again and happy to see people. There's too many good people in my past to not feel that way when I run across somebody.
Fair enough. So talk about your Army career. You had a great first assignment. How long did you stay in?
I did the 5 years. And so
5 years.
I put in my letter a year out because I knew I'd want to leave. Now, if you remember, PCSs were 4 years at that time. They were trying to save money. So I spent 4 years in Hawaii, not 3. And doing survey school at Fort Sill, it took me about a year to get to Hawaii. So it was April of 87 when I got there. And so I was there and I put in my resignation and got stop lost like we all did when the Gulf War happened. So the Gulf War came about. Guys in Hawaii were beside themselves because we actually had, I'm not going to say we're the only people with a mission, but we had a mission. So I watched the Gulf War on CNN just like the rest of the world did because our mission was the Philippines.
Right.
And if you don't remember, Imelda Marcos was my neighbor there on Oahu after having been thrown out of the Philippines. And we were there to protect Clark Air Base. I actually was on alert once. We loaded up the rounds. We're in the concertina, ready to go. That was when there was a situation where, of course, on Aquino, there was a coup attempt, and it was our turn, and we almost went. So that was the one time I had a gut check to say, well, you signed up for this. Are you really ready to go and serve? So it was a good experience for me to have, to realize that, that 5 years and 4 years of college and 5 years in the Army, there were expectations associated with that.
Absolutely. Despite Saddam Hussein's hijinks in the Middle East, the United States still had a global commitment. So we had to keep an eye on all those places.
25th ID, it was all about the Philippines.
Yeah. Now, did you have to walk those mountains in Hawaii? I've heard lots of complaints from infantrymen about having to hump those mountains. Did you do that, or you rode around in style?
I spent most of my time on the Big Island. Remember, I was artillery, so we go to the Big
Yeah.
Island all the time. The largest impact area in the U.S. Army is in between Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa. It's just a big lava field. So I didn't spend a lot of time climbing mountains, but I did make the mistake. I was the movement officer in the beginning. So I was a survey officer, and I had to make sure everything got to the docks. And so while I was moving everything to the docks, a big group of guys climbed Mauna Kea, which just sounded so exciting to me. But I missed out on it. And the next day, when everyone went back and I was stuck at PTA, Pahakaloa Training Area, the one major that was there with me, I told him, I said, I'm gonna walk just a little bit up the mountain. It just is drawing me. I got to go up. And so I walked up to the spring, about a third of the way up. And if you've ever climbed up a steep mountain, I know you have out in Denver, the top always looks like it's just right there. And so I just kept going a little bit further, a little bit further, a little bit further. 5 hours later, I make it to the top. I see the telescope. It was a triumph, and it took me 2 hours to get back to the bottom. But given the fact that I was gone for 7 hours, and back in those days, there were no cell phones. There was no, they had a helicopter on the tarmac ready to come and find me. Because apparently some Marines the year before had been stranded on the mountain and had to be medevaced off the mountain. So here's a guy by himself going to the top of Mauna Kea and back. And mind you, I'm at about 7,000 feet at PTA, and it's over 13,000 feet at the top. So I went all the way up and down, and when I got down, the DeVarty commander was ready for me. He was livid. And he told me, he said, "This is not the last, Lieutenant Crawford. This is not the last of this." And I was just like deflated. I was tired. I was totally beat. And DeVarty commander's yelling at me.
Sir, would you like to hear a joke?
And that was indeed the end of it. So this guy, Colonel Swain, some of you guys out there may know Colonel Swain. What a flame breather. That was the end of it. Just in the moment, he was livid, but I survived. And the major, it was kind of a hard ass, and he loved me from that day on. He just thought it was the greatest thing that I had done this, climbing to the top of Mauna Kea.
It appears you have a talent for making your mark in unique ways. You talked a little bit already about Georgia Tech.
I have another story. I'm actually, you don't have to, but I have to tell this other story.
Absolutely.
So, I shot out on the largest impact area in the United States Army. I'm going to say that again. I misshot. 25th Ideas Light Infantry. You spend a lot of time, moving around, a lot of sling load lifting, things like that. So air assault was a very good class for me. It was exactly what I needed.
Right.
And so I'm the XO, and we're getting ready for evaluations, and we're practicing a hip shoot. And when you do a hip shoot, the helicopters come, they grab 2 guns, move them to another location, shoot as fast as you can, get out of there, and go back to where your unit is. Mm-hmm. And so the FDC had given me the little bucks, remember those little HP computers that had all the firing data on them, and a safety tee with the initial coordinates, with the initial firing data. Put that in your pocket. And so we get in the helicopter, and I'm looking at my card, and I'm looking at the bucks, and they're not exactly the same. And that's bothering me. I don't know quite what to do, but I figure, fuck it, I'll just fire what's on the safety tee, and we'll move on from there and see how it goes. So we land, lay in the guns, get the first round off. Hill didn't see it, nothing. And so everything stops. And battalion commander's there, battalion XO, and everybody's trying to figure out what's going on. I'm like, I don't know. And they're like, well, go back and figure it out, and we'll try it again later. Mm-hmm. So we fly back to the unit, and I go to the FDC. And what I've left out of the story is that we were supposed to do the hip shoot the day before, but something had happened to cause it to be canceled, and we were doing it the next day. And so while I'm talking to the FDC, I reach in my pocket, and I pull out a second safety tee, which is from the day before. So the one I should have shot was still in my pocket, and the one I shot was the one I pulled out of my pocket. And not to divulge the names of the others, but the FDC immediately went into, well, we can calculate where it went, and it went to a place, and it did go into the impact area. It didn't, again, it's the biggest impact area. We all know it's that direction. We all know it's going to go in. So, and the firing point was one adjacent to the other one. So it really wasn't as unsafe as I make it sound, but it was a breach of safety. We know in the artillery, that's a breach. And so they're trying to tell me how to finesse this. And I'm like, no, if I've learned one thing in my upbringing, it's you just tell them what happened. And so I call back on the radio, and the battalion XO comes out, Major Dyson, a great guy, still a wonderful, wonderful person in my life, mentor. And I throw 2 safety tees on the hood of the Humvee, and I'm like, that's what happened. I explained the story. I fired the wrong safety tee. And he thanked me and left. And that night, the battalion commander came, and under the darkness of a red lens flashlight, I signed a letter of reprimand. So I had my first letter of reprimand, and it was kind of liberating. It's like, I fucked up and the world didn't end. I got a letter of reprimand. And it would come out of my file if I did good for the rest of my time. And it was over. All the guys on the gun line were livid about it. I had great soldiers who took care of me, and I took care of them. They thought it was wrong. But something happened. My company commander's father-in-law passed away, and he had to summarily leave. And we were entering into evaluations in 2 days without a company commander.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, when I went back the next morning, I had to go into PTA and retake the safety test. I had to get recertified. But, I know how to do that slide rule. I know how to calculate safety days. So 30 minutes later.
Pretty good with the slide rule, Crawdad.
30 minutes later, I was recertified. So nobody was worried about my capabilities, right? It was just like just a stupid mix-up safety key.
It all came down to 2 safety keys, not to your math. Which I'll bet on your math any day, Crawdad. The safety keys, that's a different issue.
But I still feel that moment of clarity and just telling them what happened, come what may. They allowed me to be the commander. They elevated me to be the company commander for that week. And the soldiers fell over themselves to basically perform. And we had a stellar showing in the battalion. We were number 1. Everything went really great. But the irony of all of that was that 10 days after getting a letter of reprimand, I was given an ARCOM for my performance on evaluation. So to go from letter of reprimand to ARCOM in a 10-day period, I think is pretty substantial.
There's a pretty cool frame that you could do with your letter of reprimand, the ARCOM hanging in front of it. It certainly would be a party discussion point.
And this goes back to the way it works when you're in a good unit. I knew that after that mistake, they wanted nothing more than to see me be successful. Yeah. And my unit wanted nothing more than to push that behind us. And so I always thought of that ARCOM as a unit award. I always wanted to wear it on the other side because it really represented how the Army takes care of you and values your development and invests in you. I really felt that.
It was such a great story because the phrase at the Academy now is leadership, leaders of character. And I think that story demonstrates that even back in the old days, we certainly were trained equally about being leaders of character. It's great.
So, moving on.
Got out of the Army after 5.
That's right.
What was the path from there to NASA? Was it immediate? I mean, you went to grad school, then NASA. You've been
so I was going to go to grad school. At that time, remember, there was a big drawdown. They were basically begging us to leave the military. In fact, some of our classmates behind us did fewer than 5 years. They were able to get out, early. Warren Hearn's a good friend that was with me at Georgia Tech, was one of those people. And so I knew I wanted out. Everybody was going to law school or business school, and that wasn't for me. And I told my wife, I said, I just want to have a job that I think is doing something good and is fun. And, I like science. And like I said, we went through the catalog and we headed to Georgia Tech. You go to the Presidio, you out process from the Presidio, and I had 81 days of leave when I left the Army. You're in Hawaii. Who's taking leave in Hawaii? I don't need to go anymore. So we took 81 days before. And so I got out in June. So late August was the start of school, so it was perfect. I just spent the summer traveling with my wife and getting ready. And so started at Georgia Tech and started my classes, just rudimentary stuff. And my chemistry class was taught by a person who was out in the field. He was out doing flights in the Pacific. And he came back halfway through that first quarter. Nowadays, grad students are expected to know what they want to do. I had the blessing of showing up, just saying, I'm here, show me what's good to do. And so we had basically the first year to find someone we wanted to work with. And this man came back, Dr. Doug Davis, and he described what he was doing. And it just sounded so exciting to me that I wanted to work with this guy. Now, at the same time, this guy was a taskmaster. He was a little bit intimidating, but come on, I know what intimidating is like. I've spent my life with intimidating. So I had students telling me, whatever you do, don't pick Davis. this department secretary who had been there for 30 years said, "Don't you dare work for that man, Davis." I had the head of the department say, "I understand why you're attracted to him, but just know what you're getting into." And I chose to work for Doug Davis. And again, the best choice I ever made. We just fit together. It was me and him and Gao Chen, a fellow who had just come from China. He came over in the late 80s, actually, and he's still my office mate. He's been my office mate for 31 years now.
Really?
So I
That's
tapped
amazing.
into a community at that point when I made that decision to work with him. That's carried me through to today. And those airborne campaigns that he was conducting were under the auspices of NASA. And so by participating in them, NASA got to see me in action. Watching me work alongside this person gave me great credibility. So there was a lot of respect that I could go toe-to-toe with Doug, because most people were intimidated by him, but all he wanted was just for someone to want to work with him. He was so consumed with what he did. He was viewed early on by many people as a very rude man, but I realized very early that he wasn't rude at all. He was just so fixated on that place he wanted to go. He would walk through you to get there. It wasn't that he was being mean to you. It's that he was so consumed. I would tell my wife, I'd say, Doug dreams this stuff. I'm never going to be that way. And here I am today.
And your point was well made that we came from a rude profession, so we had a lot of fire-breathing bosses and things.
And so it wasn't off-putting to me.
So
it didn't scare me away. And so, we would have group meetings. There were four of us who would have group meetings. And I remember we would meet just off from the computer lab. And one of the younger students came to me and he said, "What was going on in the room next door yesterday?" And I'm like, "We're having a group meeting. Discuss a paper and talk about the merits." He said, "I thought you guys were going to kill each other." And I was like, "No, it was just a conversation." But it was an animated conversation and a passionate conversation, an intense conversation. And I'm kind of drawn to that intensity. I really like
you guys put the storm in brainstorming.
Yeah, you want to argue your point. You want to be heard. And he was the same way. If I left work disagreeing with him, I could guarantee I would get a call around 9 or 10 p.m., which my wife hated, saying, "Hey, what about this?" Or can this get you to to sway your way of thinking more towards my side. So.
And how long have you been at NASA now? Since those days, you've been there for
97 was when I showed up at NASA.
Holy cow! Amazing. And I imagine you are the senior man there.
I am now the agency senior man. So I am the senior scientist for atmospheric chemistry for not just Langley, but for NASA.
In a class of famous people for the reason they get in the news and all sorts of things, I think that you must be one of our we are very proud of you, because that's an amazing accomplishment.
Most people
that was all born out of the fact you got plenty of sleep at West Point.
Yeah. I would say that I've flown under the radar a bit. My fame is really overseas. I'm known better in Korea and Thailand and
that's amazing.
Places like that.
But I mean, certainly you're a stellar member of the class, and certainly a class that's known out in the world. So it's amazing stuff. Guy, I think there's a whole podcast around your NASA adventures. Unfortunately, we're talking more about you than about NASA.
I can only imagine. Yeah. Even though I'm a scientist, what I learned and what I experienced at West Point has made all the difference in this career too. When you have a DC-8 full of 40 scientists, that's your unit. And if you think it's hard to get a bunch of soldiers to do what you want them to do, talking 40 strong-willed scientists into your point of view is equally daunting, maybe even more of a challenge. But those leadership skills have been immeasurably useful to me in this career as a scientist.
40 scientists who are very confident of their opinions.
Yes, as am I.
So we're entering our 60th year, each of us at different months, et cetera. Looking back to the 40-year-old crawdad, what advice would you give yourself if you look back and could give yourself 20 years worth of wisdom?
It's not that different from what I've done all along, which is don't make plans. Don't get your heart set on what's going to happen. Just work hard, keep your head down, and be ready to be in control when the decisions do come your way.
Mm-hmm. Wise words. Jim Crawford, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It's always a pleasure to see you personally, but I think everyone's going to really enjoy these stories.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Courage Never Quits podcast, where any member of the class of 1986 who is willing to tell their story will be a guest. To get the word out and to stay up to date on the latest episodes, hit the like and subscribe buttons. With 954 living graduates in the class, we have a lot of stories to collect, and you don't want to miss any of them. We'll see you in the next episode.